Betty was sitting in her crash couch, breathing hard. The intercom kept cutting in and out, but she thought there had been a collision with a stray asteroid. However, she wasn't sure. Several other passengers were in the life pod with her, though none of them were humans. Once the last crash couch was occupied, the pod released automatically. For a few brief moments, Betty was weightless, until the artificial gravity unit kicked in. The other occupants of the pod were making noises that indicated distress. Betty felt the jets kick on, and the pod began to move. There were over 1,000 passengers on the ship, and each of the pods held about a dozen individuals. Soon the pod should all link up, making it easier to share resources and effect a rescue. With over 100 individual beacons, they shouldn't be too hard to spot. Rescue should be fairly swift. Modern life pods were designed with 3 modular ports. One on the top center, one on the bottom center, and one on the port or starboard side. When ejected, they would automatically assemble into long double-column stacks. This allowed the occupants to move around and find any companions who were forced apart by seating availability, or simply because they were on disparate parts of the ship when evac was ordered. It also aided in sharing resources, and eased rescue efforts. After several hours, Betty felt a shudder in the hull, and heard the upper hatch beginning an equalization sequence. After another 15 minutes, the hatch cycled open, and Betty was able to see several alien faces staring down at her. She breathed a sigh of relief. It had been several days since the accident, and Betty found she was getting claustrophobic. While each pod was fairly spacious, and had at least some rudimentary life support functions, there was no wide open spaces and nowhere to be alone, save the toilet, which wasn't ideal. The members in her pod had changed since joining with the others, as people went looking for their companions, or were found by them. There were more people every day who passed through, looking for their travel companions, or more often than not, just moving around to get some exercise. Betty had been on the trip alone, so she didn't need to look for anyone. She had decided to stay in her pod so as to not congest the hallways and ladders that were used to move around. It had been nearly a week since the evac was ordered. Betty was bored out of her skull and tired of the dry rations they had on the pods. People had settled down some, and so traffic through the pod was reduced by a fair amount. Betty now shared her pod with 2 family groups of Xenos and a human couple. Betty had been keeping to herself, but Beau and Chester, the human couple, had made an attempt to be friendly, and she had spent a couple meals with them. Beau was a soft-spoken man with sandy blonde hair and a slight frame. Chester was husky with dark hair and a moustache that was perched above his perennial smile. Chester was more outgoing, while Beau was more calm and centered. Chester was talking to one of the Xeno families, a Zichthi brood, and the other family, Baikonur if Betty remembered correctly, were currently out making a circuit of the pods for exercise. Beau was busy with some empty food containers and a roll of binding tape from the supply cache. Betty lay on her crash couch, trying not to be driven mad from boredom. "Ha ha! Finished it!" Beau exclaimed, holding up his craft project. "What's that?" Betty asked. It looked like a plastic food tray taped to the end of a round cardboard sleeve that held some of the emergency supplies. "That is a drum," Beau said, tapping the plastic tray. A resonant thump sounded through the pod. He sat on the edge of his crash couch and held the makeshift instrument between his knees. "Chester, remember Bali?" he called, and started to play a rhythm on the drum. Chester, who was on the far side of the pod, stood up and began to clap and dance to the rhythm. He took the hands of the small, itchy child and swayed her arms back and forth to the tempo. Soon her siblings were dancing too. Chester led them around the pod, weaving around the crash couches and ladder. Betty smiled and clapped along. After a few minutes, Chester grabbed a half-empty bottle of electrolyte drink and began blowing across the rim, making a hooting noise as well. The Zichthi children began to sing little nonsense words to the rim as well. "Da-da-da! Bun-de-bun-de-bun." After about 5 or 10 minutes, everyone collapsed down into couches and laughed and cheered. Taken by the moment, Betty began to sing. Just a simple tune from an old movie she saw when she was a kid. It had always stuck in her head. Her voice carried through the nearby pods, and when she was done, a smattering of applause came through the hatches. Betty felt her cheeks get hot, and she buried her face in her hands. "Lovely," said Beau. Just then, a voice drifted in from the adjacent pod. The language was unfamiliar, but it was beautiful. When the song ended, Betty and everyone in her pod applauded. "So, what was it this time?" asked the captain. "Singing, and some rudimentary instruments," answered one of the crew. "Never fails. Humans always do something to entertain themselves and the rest of the evacuees," the captain said. "Apparently everyone took turns, not just the humans, sir." "What a surprise. Well, let's not prolong their journey any longer. Everyone has been retrieved, correct?" "Yes, Captain." "Very good. Return to station. Let's bring them home."